Tall fescue has long been considered one of the toughest and most useful pasture grasses in the United States. It can tolerate drought, heavy grazing, heat, cold, and conditions that cause many other grasses to struggle. But that toughness can come with a serious hidden risk for horses, especially pregnant mares. For years, many horse owners believed toxic tall fescue followed a fairly predictable seasonal pattern. Ergovaline concentrations were expected to rise during the spring, then decline as temperatures dropped. Once winter arrived and the pasture experienced several hard freezes, the grass was often assumed to be safe again. Now, researchers at the University of Kentucky say that assumption may no longer be reliable. Potentially dangerous concentrations of tall fescue toxins are being detected later in the year. In one especially concerning example, elevated ergovaline remained in a pasture even after more than 2 weeks of snow and ice cover. So when is tall fescue actually safe for horses? When is endophyte-infected tall fescue dangerous? And what should horse owners do before allowing pregnant mares to graze it? In today's video, we are going to examine new information that could change how horse owners manage tall fescue pastures throughout the entire year. Before we continue, this video is intended for general education and is not a substitute for advice from your veterinarian, equine nutritionist, toxicologist, or local agricultural extension specialist. Tall fescue is one of the most common pasture grasses in the United States, covering approximately 36 million acres. It is especially common throughout the transition zone, including Kentucky and several surrounding states, but it can be found in pastures and hayfields across much of the country. Tall fescue is popular for good reasons. It is persistent, it can tolerate being grazed heavily, it survives periods of drought, performs relatively well in poor conditions, and can continue growing after some other pasture grasses have gone dormant. Unfortunately, some of that resilience comes from a fungus living inside the plant. This fungus is known as an endophyte. The word endophyte simply refers to an organism that lives within a plant. In traditional toxic tall fescue, the fungus is commonly identified as Epicolae senadophyte. The relationship benefits the grass. The endophyte helps protect tall fescue against insects, drought, repeated grazing, heat, cold, and other stressors. But the fungus can also produce toxic compounds known as ergot alkaloids. Ergovaline is one of the primary alkaloids researchers monitor when evaluating toxic tall fescue. When a horse consumes enough of these compounds, the alkaloids can interfere with several important systems in the body. They can constrict blood vessels and disrupt hormonal signaling, including hormones associated with reproduction and milk production. This is why toxic tall fescue is not simply a pasture quality issue. For a pregnant mare, exposure can become a life-threatening reproductive emergency. Mares consuming toxic endophyte-infected tall fescue during late gestation can experience prolonged pregnancy, inadequate udder development, little or no milk production, abnormal placenta thickening, difficulty delivering, and premature placental separation. Premature placental separation is commonly called a red bag delivery. Instead of the normal translucent membrane appearing first, the thick red placenta separates too early and can obstruct the foal's oxygen supply. Without immediate intervention, the foal can suffocate. Affected foals may also be weak, poorly muscled, overdue, or stillborn. Even when a foal survives the delivery, the mare's lack of milk can prevent the foal from receiving enough colostrum during the critical first hours of life. And pregnant mares are not necessarily the only ones affected. Researchers report that non-pregnant mares exposed to sufficient quantities of ergot alkaloids might not respond normally to seasonal changes in daylight. These mares have unusually long spring transition, irregular heat cycles, prolonged estrus without ovulation, or reduced reproductive performance. Experimental exposure has also been associated with a greater incidence of early embryonic loss. There are still major unanswered questions about how these alkaloids affect stallions, young horses, non-breeding horses, and developing pregnancies. Researchers say the scientific literature is limited, partially because funding for equine agricultural research can be difficult to obtain. Another complication is that veterinarians currently do not have a fully validated blood, urine, or tissue test that can reliably confirm ergoline exposure in a horse. By the time a mare develops obvious problems, testing the pasture might also fail to show what she was exposed to weeks or months earlier. Ergovaline concentrations can change with plant growth, temperature, rainfall, season, fertilization, and pasture conditions. This brings us to the new warning. Tall fescue toxins were traditionally believed to follow a seasonal pattern. Pasture testing frequently showed some of the highest ergovaline concentrations during April and May. Owners were particularly cautious during periods of active spring growth and around seed head development. Late fall and winter, however, were often treated as lower risk periods. Researchers at the University of Kentucky say recent weather patterns are challenging that belief. Mild conditions have allowed tall fescue to remain actively growing into November and December, even as grasses such as bluegrass and orchard grass become dormant. Testing has repeatedly found alarmingly high ergovaline concentrations in some tall fescue pastures during these later months. This matters because tall fescue may represent only a portion of a pasture during the spring and summer. But if most other grasses become dormant while tall fescue continues growing, horses could consume a much larger proportion of fescue. In other words, a field containing what appears to be only a small amount of tall fescue might still expose horses to a significant dose if that fescue is the only green grass available. The percentage of tall fescue in a pasture is therefore only part of the equation. Owners must also consider how much other forage is available to dilute the horse's total exposure. Researchers are also questioning the belief that a few consecutive cold days will quickly make a toxin pasture safe. After more than 2 weeks of snow and ice cover in January 2026, a University of Kentucky team tested one pasture immediately after the snow and ice melted. Ergovaline concentrations remained high. This does not mean every tall fescue pasture will remain dangerous after a freeze. It means cold weather alone cannot guarantee that a specific pasture is safe. A calendar cannot test your grass. Snow cannot certify your pasture, and tall fescue that looks dormant or harmless can still contain alkaloids. So, is all tall fescue toxic to horses? No. There are 3 general categories horse owners should understand. The first is toxic endophyte-infected tall fescue. This is the traditional type associated with dangerous ergot alkaloids and reproductive problems in mares. The second is endophyte-free tall fescue. Without the endophyte, the plant does not produce the same toxic alkaloids. However, removing the endophyte also removes some of the protein that makes tall fescue so durable. Endophyte-free varieties may not tolerate harsh conditions as well and can eventually be outcompeted by toxic tall fescue returning to the field. The third option is Novel-Endophyte tall fescue. Novel endophytes are selected to provide the grass with much of its desired persistence without producing the toxic ergopeptine alkaloids associated with traditional infected fescue. A University of Kentucky study comparing pregnant mares on Novel-Endophyte tall fescue with mares on orchard grass and Kentucky bluegrass found no significant differences in the evaluated foaling outcomes. The Novel-Endophyte pasture produced either no ergovaline or only trace amounts. That sounds promising, but there is an important catch. You cannot determine which kind of tall fescue you have simply by looking at it. Toxic endophyte-infected fescue Endophyte-Free Fescue, and Novel-Endophyte Fescue can look nearly identical. Confirming what is growing in the pasture might require specialized testing and reliable records showing exactly what variety was planted. A horse owner should also understand the difference between testing for endophyte infection and testing for alkaloid concentration. An endophyte test helps establish whether the fungus is present. An ergovaline analysis evaluates the concentration of one of the important toxic alkaloids in the forage sample. A pasture can contain a high percentage of endophyte-infected plants, while the measured alkaloid concentrations varies considerably throughout the year. Therefore, knowing that the endophyte is present does not tell you exactly how much toxin the horses are consuming at the moment. Obtaining a representative sample is extremely important. Collecting grass from one convenient corner of a large field might not accurately reflect the horse's exposure. University of Kentucky's sampling guidance recommends collecting multiple small samples while following a path across the pasture, cutting the plants at approximately the height the animals are grazing, combining the material, and following the laboratory handling and shipping requirements. Because alkaloid concentrations can change, a single result should not be treated as a permanent guarantee. A pasture that tested lower at one point might produce a different result after a period of active growth, drought, fertilization, temperature changes, or seed head development. Researchers now recommend vigilance throughout the year rather than assuming certain months are automatically safe. For pregnant mares, the safest management decision may be avoiding any uncertain tall fescue exposure rather than attempting to identify one supposedly safe season. The American Association of Equine Practitioners advises removing broodmares from endophyte-infected fescue pastures before breeding and again well before foaling. Recommendations regarding the precise withdrawal period can vary, so owners should develop a plan with their attending veterinarian. If a mare has already been exposed during late pregnancy, contact your veterinarian immediately. Do not wait until her due date or something appears wrong. A veterinarian might recommend closer monitoring and, in some circumstances, medication intended to reduce certain effects of fescue toxicosis. That treatment must be prescribed and supervised by a veterinarian. It is not a replacement for removing the mare from the source of exposure. Owners should keep accurate breeding dates and estimated foaling dates, monitor the mare's udder development, and watch for normal physical changes that should occur as foaling approaches. A mare that goes beyond her expected foaling date, fails to develop an udder, produces little or no milk, or does not show the expected relaxation around the tailhead and vulva needs veterinary attention. Every birth involving a mare with suspected toxic fescue exposure should be attended. Owners should also have a plan for dealing with a red bag delivery, dystocia, a weak foal, or a foal that does not receive adequate colostrum. For general pasture management, mowing before seed heads develop can help reduce exposure because seed heads can contain especially high toxin concentrations. Owners should also be cautious during heat, drought, and other conditions that stress the plant. Simply diluting toxic fescue with other forage might reduce total exposure, but it does not transform toxic grass into safe grass. Pregnant mares are unusually sensitive, and researchers acknowledge that a universal safe concentration has not been firmly established for every horse in every situation. If a pasture requires renovation, consult a forage specialist before beginning. Eliminating an established toxic fescue stand can be difficult. Seeds or surviving plants can reintroduce the problem, and there is no simple selective herbicide that removes only toxic plants while leaving identical safe fescue untouched. Novel-Endophyte tall fescue may be a valuable replacement in areas where a durable cool season grass is necessary, but owners must purchase certified seed, establish it correctly, and prevent toxic volunteer plants from contaminating the new stand. So when is tall fescue safe for horses? Tall fescue is considered safest when testing and planting records confirm that it is endophyte-free or contains a proven novel endophyte that does not produce toxic alkaloids. Traditional toxic endophyte-infected tall fescue should not be assumed safe simply because it is winter, the field has frozen, or snow has covered the ground. For pregnant mares, an untested or uncertain pasture should be treated with particular caution. The major lesson from this developing research is not that every tall fescue pasture is dangerous every day of the year. It is that horse owners can no longer rely exclusively on season, appearance, or temperature to determine the safety. The old question was, what month does tall fescue become safe? The better question may now be, what does current testing show about this particular pasture? Because when a pregnant mare and her unborn foal are depending on that answer, guessing is not good enough. Thank you so much for joining us. And remember, I am not AI. If you listen closely, you can hear me breathing.